Hey everybody, have to show up at the start on screen because of how the YouTube algorithm works now. But anyways, welcome back. PayPal, Patreon links are down below if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. Now we'll get on to the actual video. All right, here we go then. So it's a month and a half into the 2026 Iran war, and the situation has changed since then and remains dynamically changing. So I figured I'd do another current oil supply disruption update as things have changed and the deficit on the market has decreased down to much less catastrophic levels. So, to start with the basics, obviously, normally, under regular circumstances, about 17 million barrels per day would be flowing out from the Persian Gulf on oil tankers. And once the war started, although Iran didn't try to physically block the strait, the insurance companies of the global shipping industry immediately got spooked and told the shipping companies that own and operate the oil tankers that they would either temporarily refuse to provide insurance coverage on the tankers, or in the case of those who still would, they were going to charge the shipping industry 5 times the normal insurance premium for those particular tankers that transit the strait. So the global shipping industry decided to just park everything and sit there and wait, except for those carrying crude oil from Iran, as they're part of the global quote unquote shadow fleet. And after the war started, Iran's domestic consumption crashed from about 1.6 million down to only 700,000 barrels per day, while their production is still a little bit above 3 million. So their exports actually jumped up to 2.5 million. And so that was what was making it out of the strait. So instead of a 17 million barrel per day deficit, that was a 14.5 for a short period of time. However, as the weeks passed, larger amounts of relief started to appear, as back before giant trillion-dollar money funnels into the abyss, like the line and the cube, a long time ago, Saudi Arabia actually spent its money on smart things like the east to west pipeline for situations just like this one. So they were able to start diverting a huge part of their oil production out over to the Red Sea coast, and the pipeline is pumping about 7 million barrels per day. However, 1 million was already going east to west before the war started, so the actual additional amount is about 6. Remove that from the deficit, and obviously that brought the deficit down to only 8.5 million barrels per day. The UAE also has a port outside of the Persian Gulf on its Gulf of Oman coast, and that port maxes out at about 1.5. They were already sending out about 500,000 through that port before the war. Obviously, they've diverted oil through their internal pipeline and put that up to full capacity, thus taking off another one from the global deficit, bringing the deficit down to 7.5. And Iran kept reiterating that everyone was free to just come and go through the strait, the only exceptions being tankers that were heading to or from or belonged to the US and Israel. And it's been now, as we've gone into April, over the last 2 weeks, that the shipping industry has gradually started testing that. And Iran's claim has been true so far. And after going down to only 6 or 7 transiting per day from the normal 140 before the war, it has crept back up now to about 20 per day. And that's all different types of ships, not just oil tankers. But predominantly, the oil that is now starting to make its way out of the Persian Gulf again has been predominantly coming from Iraq and Kuwait. And so, from Iraq and Kuwait combined, about 2 million is now being exported per day, which would thus bring the deficit from 7.5 down to 5.5 million barrels per day. As of the ceasefire being implemented a week ago, things have started to creep back to normal in Iran, so their domestic consumption has crept back up to about 1 million barrels per day, which cut down their export. That has pushed Iran's exports back down from 2.5 down to 2, which would obviously see the deficit then back up at about 6. However, starting Monday, the U.S. Navy specifically started blocking oil tankers coming out of Iran carrying Iranian crude. So now that 2 million per day from Iran specifically is no longer getting out as of a few days ago. So that puts the deficit back up at 8 million barrels per day. Although whether it were the current 8 million barrel per day deficit or still back down at 6, the effective deficit is actually lower or would be lower than either because the surge upwards in prices has, to the surprise of no one, hopefully, caused demand destruction or caused demand globally to start contracting and start pulling back. Some specific examples who gave their most recent numbers in the last few days being, for example, Vietnam, who pre-war was at a demand level of around 750,000 barrels per day, and now a month and a half into it has contracted down to about 550. China, being at about 17 flat before the war, has contracted down to about 16.1. And Germany, who was around 2 million, dropped down to around 1.7 million. So the effective deficit is lower than the actual on paper deficit, which is why the whole price situation is only seeming, at the moment at least, to reflect the 2008 financial crisis before everything collapsed, as opposed to being a few factors higher with the market prices or the speculative prices, aka the gambling price, fluctuating between $90 and $115 per barrel, depending on the day and depending on which particular one you're looking at. And the actual physical price of oil, the price that's actually being paid by customers around the world, is in the 140s. And so that is where things stand as of the moment. And we are waiting to see whether the negotiations actually pull through and everything chills down and the outbound traffic returns to normal. Anyways, that's how it is for the moment. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around listening. You can like if you enjoyed. There's hundreds of other videos and stuff across the channel, across all kinds of different types of subjects. I do live streams, usually Tuesday nights and either Thursday or Friday, it depends. Patreon links are down below, along with the YouTube super chat, thanks, whatever button thing. If you want to support me, only do so if you actually can. There's a link to my cat's YouTube channel in the top pinned comment. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.